So I just want to make a few remarks to get the day started here. The bottleneck, the great disruption, the great turning, peak everything. Whatever you call it, it's the big enchilada. Or in the words of the filmmaker Tom Shadyac, the shift is about to hit the fan. We're experiencing the dawn of a revolutionary transformation. This awkward tween state also marks the end of prehistory, the sunset of an ecologically illiterate civilization. Like a baby being born, a new world is crowning. The revolution has begun, but in fits and starts. The challenge is it's 1 minute to midnight, too late to avoid large-scale destruction. We have to fan the shift to eco-literate societies at sufficient speed and scale to dodge irretrievable cataclysm. From breakdown to breakthrough, it's a revolution from the heart of nature and the human heart. It leads with a basic shift in our relationship with nature, from resource and object to mentor, model, and partner. Game-changing breakthroughs in science, technology, and design, such as biomimicry, are revolutionizing our very ways of knowing. The global rights of nature movement is recognizing the inalienable rights of the non-human world of ecosystems and critters, widening the circle of compassion and kinship. Greater decentralization and localization are building resilience from the ground up, shaped by ancient indigenous wisdom of becoming native to our place. The digital communications revolution is primed to spread solutions without borders at texting speed. Historic demographic shifts are fertilizing the landscape, from the ascendancy of women's leadership to the world beat of cultural and racial pluralism. Empires and dynasties are waning and waxing with sudden shifts in the global balance of power. When a chrysalis turns into a butterfly, the caterpillar's immune system attacks the very first of the butterfly's cells as invaders. The pushback will be equally fierce. Shadows of widespread destruction and violence, mass dislocations, virulent ideologies, and ethnic strife. Yet in the end, the big hairy caterpillar audaciously turns into a butterfly. What does the revolution look like on the ground? As climate shocks rock the planet, renewable energy is reaching a tipping point and going mainstream. Worldwide, renewables now produce 1/4 of global power capacity and 18% of electricity. Germany's aiming for a carbon-neutral grid while maintaining its highly industrialized status. Sweden plans to eliminate fossil fuels for electricity by 2020 and gas-powered cars by 2030. Renewable energy investment is attracting many of the world's largest companies now, and government policies are largely responsible, in over 70 national and state governments, doubling in the last 5 years. Europe has the leading position globally in great part because of government policy. EU business leadership sees green products as its Silicon Valley. The EU is aiming for 25% of global green product market share by 2020. China has leapfrogged the world in pursuit of a low-carbon economy. It's now the largest manufacturer of wind turbines, solar panels, and the most efficient grids and coal plants. It's created a national energy super ministry, and the president of China has stated that China must seize preemptive opportunities in the new round of the global energy revolution. The expansion of wind power is moving to industrial scale. Electric cars are heading for the mass market worldwide. An estimated 23% of US emissions can be cut by 2020 just through energy efficiency, led by California and Massachusetts. Job creation and new businesses are key drivers of renewables. Germany now employs almost as many people in clean energy as in its largest sector of automobiles. Sweden's working to cut emissions by 25 to 50% by changing the national diet. A new national food policy puts emissions labeling on foods and restaurant menus. The principal Scandinavian organic certification program will require low-carbon farming methods. And Sweden's dietary recommendations are now circulating throughout the EU. It's just a matter of time. Greatly heightened investment from banks is advancing these trends, especially in Europe, China, and Latin America. Germany's Deutsche Bank is redirecting much of its $700 billion assets to address global warming, and national green infrastructure banks are on the horizon. The banking industry is actually studying natural ecosystems for lessons about resilience. The Bank of England says the industry will be fundamentally reshaped to treat global finance as a complex, adaptive system like a living ecosystem. A parallel epiphany is bubbling up in giant engineering firms like CH2M Hill. Instead of steel and concrete, they're recommending soft infrastructure, flexible ecological systems like wetlands, oyster beds, and barrier islands. The bywords are reliability, local self-sufficiency, and decentralization. FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers are close behind. In the absence of a national clean energy policy in the US, the action's coming mainly from cities and states. Mayors and governors are developing ambitious climate strategies and policies while creating jobs, businesses, and living laboratories for a low-carbon world. The Pacific Coast states are working to jettison coal within a decade. Sounds great, right? But of course, there's more to the story. The current gains are tenuous, vulnerable to the vagaries of politics and economic oscillations, and we're still losing ground anyway. Global emissions will rise by 40% by 2030, more than half of which will come from China and the balance from developing countries. In truth, the world is reaching peak everything, in Richard Heinberg's words. Or, as Groucho Marx put it, why should we bother about the next generation? They've never done anything for us. A major barrier in the US is the annual military budget of over $1 trillion a year. Although the Defense Department has embraced climate change as a top national security issue, national sustainability must now move front and center. As David Orr observes, true security is inseparable from issues of education, preservation of soils, forests, and waters, and broadly shared sustainable prosperity. From this perspective, America is less secure than any time in its history. The concept of sustainability should be the new organizing principle for both domestic and foreign policy. What's needed is the national and global equivalent of a wartime mobilization, with sustainability as magnetic north. Many say only catastrophe will precipitate this inevitable turning point, and are readying mobilization plans. Paul Gilding's 1-degree war plan forecasts a coalition of the cooling anchored by the US, China, and the EU, who produce 50% of global emissions, and who will then engage Russia, India, Japan, and Brazil to hit 67%. But for now, the US is being left behind. As a leader of Germany's Deutsche Bank stated, they're asleep at the wheel on climate change, asleep at the wheel on job growth, asleep at the wheel on this industrial revolution taking place in the energy industry. Rather than catastrophe, US business competitiveness may ultimately prove the compelling driver. Yet, as Einstein said, we cannot solve the problem with the same mentality that created it. The supreme challenge of global interdependence is to foster meta-cooperation in a full world. Brother, can you spare a paradigm? Our collective fate likely hangs from the cliff by 3 intertwining ropes: systems, power, and story. Shifting the mindscape starts with systems thinking. Complex systems by nature are unpredictable, nonlinear, and cannot be controlled. The key to building resilience is to foster the system's ability to adapt amid dramatic change. As Dana Meadows observed, a diverse system with multiple pathways and redundancies is more stable and less vulnerable to external shock than a uniform system with little diversity. A paradigm is the hardest thing to change in a system, but it can happen really fast. As Meadows advised, keep pointing at anomalies and failures in the old paradigm. Keep speaking loudly and with assurance from the new one. Insert people with the new paradigm in places of public visibility and power. Don't waste time with reactionaries. Work with active change agents and the vast middle ground of open people. At the core is the transformation to a restoration economy. Europe's model of social capitalism may be the most important innovation in the world economy since the rise of the corporation. Among its structural innovations are two key policies: works councils and co-determination. Works councils give employees significant input and decision-making or veto power on substantive issues. They improve efficiency, worker buy-in, and the quality of decisions. Co-determination, where workers are elected to company supervisory boards, has fostered a culture of consultation and cooperation, benefited businesses, and distributed wealth more broadly. Most EU nations use this practice. As a result, the 27-nation European Union, the world's largest economy, has a higher per capita growth rate and slightly lower unemployment than in the US. The vibrant small business sector produces 2/3 of EU jobs. What's afoot globally today is the redesign of the corporation into diverse structures of business ownership and governance, from large-scale cooperatives to mission-controlled social businesses and foundation-owned companies. Bill Gates calls it creative capitalism. It works. Employee-owned firms modestly outperform their peers. Foundation-owned, values-driven companies perform at least as well or better. And in Europe, co-ops comprise 12% of GDP and engage 60% of the population. Marjorie Kelly terms these innovations emergent new organizational species designed like living systems to deliver human and ecological benefits as well as profits. Another meta-trend transforming the system at large is the ascendancy of women's leadership. As writer Hannah Rosen points out in The End of Men, these societies, great article, read it. Those societies that take advantage of the talents of all of their adults, not just half of them, have pulled away from the rest. One study measuring the economic and political power of women in 162 countries found, with few exceptions, that the greater the power of women, the greater the nation's economic success. As David Gergen notes, women are knocking at the door of leadership at the very moment when their talents are especially well matched with the requirements of the day. Natural systems have their own operating instructions, as Janine Benyus, biomimicry master, describes. Nature runs on current sunlight. Nature banks on diversity. Nature rewards cooperation. Nature builds from the bottom up. Nature recycles everything. And Earth's mission statement, life creates conditions conducive to life. Given that the most important element in systems is purpose and goals, the big question is, what's the economy for? If the goal is building resilience, the priority flips from growth and expansion to sufficiency and a sustainable prosperity. Resilience favors economic relocalization, which in turn produces greater energy and food security. How then do we set about redesigning human systems? And who has the power to decide? In practice, our current system design in the US concentrates wealth and distributes poverty. The super-rich 0.01% of the population, about 13,000 people, earn as much as the bottom 120 million. US unemployment is the highest since the Great Depression. 44 million Americans now live in poverty. Joblessness, low wages, and underemployment are the new normal. Washington, D.C. has 11,195 corporate lobbyists. In 2009, they spent 6 times all spending combined by environmental, consumer, labor, and other non-corporate entities. The biggest lobbying and campaign spender is the financial services sector, with banks being the most powerful. As Senator Dick Durbin commented, frankly, they own the place. It's no wonder the estimated lobbying return on investment is 100 to 1. Remember that $13 trillion in public bailout funds to the banks? That is the public option. No wonder there's a Tea Party. Call me traditional, but the Tea Party really needs to get back to its roots. The Boston Tea Party was a rebellion against a government-backed corporate monopoly. As author Tom Hartman recounts, Britain's East India Corporation staked its claim on parts of North America under military protection from its biggest investor, the British Crown. Already hugely powerful in India and China, the corporation had gained control over almost all international commerce to and from North America. But it was bedeviled by colonial small businessmen and entrepreneurs who dared to run their own ships and buy tea wholesale from Dutch trading companies. The East India Corporation obtained laws to eliminate the competition, backed by the death penalty. As Hartman points out, taxation without representation meant hitting the average person and small business with taxes while letting the richest and most powerful corporation in the world off the hook for its taxes. Today it's called dumping. The Boston Tea Party precipitated the American Revolution and guided the first American century of highly restrictive corporate governance and law. That revolutionary tradition is resurfacing today in the growing movement to challenge and revoke corporate constitutional rights. But the story of today's battle is above all the battle of the story. As human beings, we're hardwired for story. When our story conflicts with the facts, we stick with our story. As scholar Richard Tarnas observes, worldviews create worlds. The ruling story, according to Western civilization, took hold about 500 years ago with the birth of the scientific revolution and exaltation of human reason. When the Copernican revolution showed the Earth revolves around the sun, science redefined humanity's place in the natural order and in the cosmos. Perhaps the defining characteristic of the modern mind is the belief in a radical separation between the human self and the external world. According to the modern mind, Tarnas observes, apart from the human being, the cosmos is seen as entirely impersonal and unconscious, mere matter in motion, mechanistic and purposeless, ruled by chance and necessity. It's altogether indifferent to human consciousness and values. The world outside the human being lacks conscious intelligence, it lacks interiority, and it lacks intrinsic meaning and purpose. For the modern mind, the only source of meaning in the universe is human consciousness. The modern mind stands in radical contrast with the primal worldview exemplified by indigenous cultures. As Tarnas continues, primal experience takes place within a world soul, an anima mundi, a living matrix of embodied meaning. Because the world is understood as speaking a symbolic language, direct communication of meaning and purpose from world to human can occur. The linear, mechanistic, reductionist worldview has yielded today to a vastly more complex view of interdependence and other ways of knowing. From complexity and chaos theory to the Gaia hypothesis, a new cosmology is unfolding. In this scientific revolution, the Earth does not revolve around us. Tarnas frames the battle of the cosmic story in this way. Imagine for a moment that you are the universe, but for the purposes of this thought experiment, that you are not the disenchanted, mechanistic universe of conventional modern cosmology, but rather a deep-souled, subtly mysterious cosmos of great spiritual beauty and creative intelligence. And imagine that you're approached by two different epistemologies, two suitors, as it were, who seek to know you. To whom would you open your deepest secrets? To which approach would you be most likely to reveal your authentic nature? Would you open most deeply to the suitor, the way of knowing, who approached you as though you were essentially lacking in intelligence or purpose, as though you had no interior dimension to speak of, no spiritual capacity or value, who thus saw you as fundamentally inferior to himself, and let us give the two suitors not entirely arbitrarily the traditional masculine gender, who related to you as though your existence were valuable primarily to the extent that he could develop and exploit your resources to satisfy his various needs, and whose motivation for knowing you was ultimately driven by a desire for increased intellectual mastery, predictive certainty, and efficient control over you for his own self-enhancement? Or would you, the cosmos, open yourself most deeply to that suitor who viewed you as being at least as intelligent and noble, as worthy a being, as permeated with mind and soul, as endowed with spiritual depths and mystery as he? This suitor seeks to know you not that he might better exploit you, but rather to unite with you and thereby bring forth something new, a creative synthesis from both of your depths. He desires to liberate that which has been hidden by the separation between knower and known. His ultimate goal of knowledge is a more richly responsive and empowered participation in a co-creative unfolding of new realities. He seeks an intellectual fulfillment that's intimately linked with imaginative vision, moral transformation, empathic understanding, aesthetic delight. His act of knowledge is essentially an act of love and intelligence combined, of wonder as well as discernment, of opening to a process of mutual discovery. To whom would you be more likely to reveal your deepest truths? Which suitor shall we choose? Which suitor do you choose? Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.